Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Proud2Vote, an LGBTQ2SIA+ town hall discussion with representatives. We're supposed to have representatives from all four main parties, so we do now, running in the 2021 federal election: the Greens, the Liberals, the NDPs, and the Conservatives. I'm Charmaine De Silva, News Director for News 1130 and City News Vancouver, and I'm going to be your host and moderator for tonight's discussion. But before we get started, I'm going to turn it over to Semple Yan for a territorial welcome.
Tim Kwamantomi up Tim Sequitals Kwamantomi Tim the Quachnomi up Tim the Glakwa Chit Nata Amalai Ohumeo CM Squallow and Tweets a Stalmok Chit Musquems Hotmish Silewato Stalmok Chit Jin Kwamantomi. That's a lot of language. So I am grateful to see each and every one of you. Dr. Hedy Fry, it's really good to see you, sister. Really honored that you all arrived safely in what we know today is the city of Vancouver. We know it as Kamalai, a shared territory for the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. I'm going to offer us a traditional song, and that will pay homage to who we are as Stalmok, as Aboriginal people. So the song is choreographed by my son, Chief Rena Troto, Sisiam, in 2010.
Yo ho, yo ho, yo ho,
CM Sequitals Chit Kwamantomi CM the Quachnomi FCM Kwamantomi CM. Very grateful to see each and every one of you, respected elders, matriarchs, family. We are honored to see each and every one of you. The Squamish language in that song translates to Kwamantomi Chasiam, we are grateful to our Creator. Chitwa ATT, we are here. Chin Chin's Twai, helping each other. In Chotmot Stalmo, as one people. And that's who we are as human beings. We are on Mother Earth together. For those who may not know the history of Indigenous votes, we didn't receive voting rights until 1961. Voting is very important for people of who we are as LGBTQS. Many of us feel that we're not included in our home community. That's why a lot of Two-Spirit people navigate into the metropolises across Canada. But we are still, our voices are still valid, our voices are still needed to be heard, and we need to work together as a people. Regardless of what happens, we need to hold each other up and hold each other up with dignity, pride, and compassion. That's why I vote in every election. I have since I was voting age, 90 way back when. So I encourage each and every one of you, if we don't vote, then our votes aren't counted. And when our votes aren't counted, then that really affects who we are, especially in our LGBTQS community. We need as many votes as possible. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Sempoyan, for that incredible welcome, as well as those very, very important words. I know we all certainly appreciate it. And you are right, it is absolutely important to get out there and vote, make an informed decision. And that's one of the reasons that we are gathered here today to help you be able to do that. Tonight's town hall has been organized by a group of nonprofit organizations serving our community, the LGBTQ2SIA+ community across British Columbia. Community, BC's Queer, Trans, and Two-Spirit Resource Center, Rainbow Refugee, Loud Business Association, Community-Based Research Center, and Pride at Work Canada came together to bring you tonight's discussion with questions submitted by those organizations serving the queer community through BC. Tonight's town hall is really meant to create a safe space in order for us to discuss topics important to the queer community. So our questions are very specific to this topic. We shared our questions in advance with the candidates in order to give them an opportunity to prepare their answers. And we asked each party to send a candidate who was familiar with issues important to the queer community. We do have 9 questions to get through. The candidates will have 2 minutes each for opening statements. We'll get to the questions and we'll give each candidate another 2 minutes for closing statements. I will do my best to keep people to time. It's important, as we mentioned, we have a lot of topics to get through. Now, we do expect tonight to be lively and a unique discussion that centers on queer perspectives. Some of the topics discussed are sensitive and potentially emotionally triggering for some viewers. So during the live broadcast, a registered clinical counselor from Rainbow Refugee will be standing by to provide anyone who needs assistance if they feel that they need it. They can be reached confidentially by text message at 613-604-5024. Once again, that's 613-604-5024. This number is also going to be posted in the comments below. So please make sure that you take care of your mental health. Now, a note for our candidates. I'm going to ask once again to stay within that 2-minute time limit, avoid any crosstalk. This is a virtual discussion, so crosstalk can be difficult to understand for viewers, and it will also be impossible for our incredible ASL interpreter. We can also mute your microphone if needed, although I hope we don't have to actually get to that point. A word about our ASL interpretation. Tonight's event is accessible to the deaf community, and we encourage our candidates, and I know this might be hard, to speak slowly and enunciate. It'll make things easier for our interpreter. How am I doing? interpretation-wise, speed-wise. Okay, good. All right. So let's get this thing started. And so we're going to give each of the candidates, as I mentioned, a chance for an opening statement. The speaker order was decided by random draw, and we're going to rotate the order throughout the discussion. So to kick things off, we have Hannah Hodgson with the Conservatives. Hannah, you have 2 minutes.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that incredible welcome. People who know me will know speaking slowly is not my forte, but I will do my best. My name is Hannah. I'm the Conservative Party candidate in the riding of Victoria on Vancouver Island. And, you know, coming here, I think many people have asked me, why am I running for the Conservative Party? As a, proud, people say, as a proud trans woman, proud member of the queer community. But the reality is that I truly believe that Canada's recovery plan is the best plan to lead Canada, my community on the island, and frankly, the LGBTQ community into a brighter future. Specifically, I think that one of the things that people see about conservative parties is, have a responsibility, a history of getting things done. And I think people are frankly tired of the current government promising things and not coming through with them. For instance, getting rid of the blood ban is a thing that I think people are very concerned about that hasn't been addressed by the government. They've campaigned on it a couple times. Still, unfortunately, this transphobic and homophobic policy is still in place. But ultimately, speaking of the LGBT community and their needs, the needs of everyone, more so in many cases, as we know that LGBTQ people face higher rates of poverty, higher rates of homelessness. So our Canada's recovery plan to address housing shortages, make housing more affordable, more accessible and secure, make sure that there's employment, make sure that there's economic development, make sure that there are mental health resources in place for all Canadians, all things that will help the LGBTQ community in really genuine, profound ways. I'm proud of who I am, and I'm also proud to be a Conservative candidate. Thank you so much for having me here, and I look forward to the debate.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you. You actually stayed under the 2 minutes, so this is the bar. You kept the time really well. Our next candidate we're going to go to now is Brianne Ouellette from the Ndp. Brianne?
Hello, I'm Brianne Ouellette. My pronouns are he and him. I'm 44 years old and I'm Indigenous. I'm a Métis man originally from Saskatchewan. I'm also a lawyer, and I served as a lawyer for the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. Here's the Ndp platform in a catchy nutshell. I'm warning you that Indigenous people love to sing. More affordable housing in our lives, more universal health care by our side. Decriminalized possession is what we need, as long as safe supply is what we see. A healthy environment in the sun, and stopping dirty pipelines all night long. Ban conversion therapy and end the blood ban. Our love for all of this makes me your man. I'm ecstatic to announce that the generosity of Vancouver Centre has already raised $100,000 for my campaign of real reconciliation, with 1/3 from people who have never contributed to our local NDP. Many people have already told me that they have voted for me because they know I will fight for accountability no matter who forms government, Liberal, Conservative, or NDP minority government. I will fight for this riding with unmatched energy and commitment, and I will fight for the rainbow community. On this groundswell of support, I hope to serve as Vancouver Centre's first Indigenous Member of Parliament. I hope that you want that too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brianne. And you not only beat Hannah's time, you also threw in a little jazzy number there. So I think Dr. Daviani Singh from the Green Party, it's your turn. I don't know how if you're going to sing, if you're going to dance, but here's your opportunity to introduce yourself.
Thank you. I really think it's a hard act to follow. Singing and dancing is not my thing, but I will agree with Hannah on one thing. People who know me, speaking slowly is really hard for me, so I will try my best. I'm Dr. Daviani Singh. I am a climate scientist, a financial analyst, and an economist. And I am running from Vancouver Quadra, which is on the unceded and traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people. The reason I like to say that is, as an immigrant from a colonized nation, I want to ensure that my work does not result in recolonization. And to me, that means a genuine commitment to truth, reconciliation, justice, and land back. That said, I am really honored to be here today as a queer woman of color who's also an immigrant, a renter, all the issues that we are facing. I'm really excited to be here to be able to speak to that. And I thought I ran in October as well provincially with the BC Greens, and I ran because of climate inaction by government. And as a climate scientist, I'm terrified about the future. But soon it became more than just about climate for me as a scientist. It became about representation, and that matters. I had so many queer people and women of color message me and say that thank you for giving us hope in politics. Thank you for running, because for the first time in our lives, we saw ourselves represented in politics. And that made me realize how growing up, I had never truly had role models in politics or in science because of this lack of representation. And representation is the first step, but the real thing we need is changes to policy, because a lot of people like to say I'm not political, but to me that comes from a place of privilege, because the moment we step out of that door, our life is political. And with that, I will end.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Singh. Appreciate it. Now our final opening statement goes to Dr. Hedy Fry of the Liberal.
Thank you very much. And I wanted to acknowledge that I'm on the unceded territory of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples of the Coast Salish nations. I began my journey in politics in 1993 when I ran on with Jean Chrétien. So he gave me a commitment that he would amend the Canadian Human Rights Act to add sexual orientation as a ground for discrimination. He did, and the rest is what you see today is history. I was moved to do this because as a physician, I had patients whom I saw suffer a lack of access to mental and physical health care, and who actually suffered very much from the discrimination leveled at them and their lack of access to equality under the law. Liberal governments since then have moved forward after that very first amendment of the Canadian Human Rights, earlier on to the decriminalization of homosexuality by Pierre-Elliott Trudeau, all the way to 2017, when Justin Trudeau actually amended the Human Rights Act to add gender expression and gender identity. So Liberal governments throughout their history have moved forward on equality for the LGBTQ2+ community. I just want to say that this is something I am committed to. There are ways to go. We still have much work to do to get society to acknowledge the equality exists and should exist. But I'd be happy to answer any questions. And I want you to know that I've been committed to this very clear issue for 28 years.
Well, thank you, Dr. Fry, and thank you to all of the candidates for staying within your time limits. I know, that can be difficult, but let's dive right in now to our town hall questions. Our first question comes to us from the Fernie Pride Society, which supports and connects the queer community in the Elk Valley. They ask, the 2SL LGBTQIA+ population in BC is diverse and beautiful, but rural queer people can face challenges unique to social, economic, and cultural barriers resulting from their geographic isolation relative to urban centers. What would your party do to ensure that 2SL LGBTQIA+ people in rural BC have access to inclusive medical care, safe spaces, and equitable employment opportunities free from bias and discrimination? How would you address the inclusion challenges in rural British Columbia? We're going to continue to rotate our speakers in order. So our first shot at answering this will go to Brianne Ouellette of the NDP. Brianne, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Sadly, this is a timely question for me. I have a childhood friend who I will call Tim to protect his privacy. Tim's a gay man living in a rural area, and he contracted an STI a number of months ago. He's been trying to get medical attention, and he's seen far too many doctors without receiving appropriate care. Some have refused to treat him because they say he has made a lifestyle choice that they don't condone. He's been told that he should undergo conversion therapy. He's even been told to come back after a few months of contemplating his sin. He still hasn't received appropriate care. He's been traveling further and further outward from his home, seeking a doctor that will treat him with dignity as a human being, instead of judging him for being who he is and who his partners are. I've seen this sort of judgment somewhere else, at the National Inquiry. Doctors also provide an unacceptable standard of care to Indigenous people, Black people, and people of color. This makes me so angry. I say enough is enough. Human rights tribunals and regulation of the medical community is failing to address all forms of prejudice and stigmatization. I want to see provisions added to the criminal code to address these unacceptable abuses of medical power. Doctors and other medical practitioners will stop doing this, or they will face criminal records and all the impacts that come with that. That is my promise to you as the next MP for Vancouver Centre. Thank you.
Thanks, Brianne. Now to Dr. Singh with the Green Party.
Thank you, Brianne. And I would have to agree with Brianne on everything that he mentioned. Getting access to good healthcare in rural areas is really hard, but to be honest, it's not even safe and accessible for a lot of us marginalized people and queer people in urban areas. Safe spaces and the equitable employment are best addressed through nonprofit programs, and we need these targeted fundings in rural areas. When it comes to the federal government, we need to set minimum standards and invest in the provinces to support them in training for healthcare services. And this funding needs to go to the provinces so we can train the staff that knows and is experienced with dealing with marginalized people and especially queer people. There is, it would be great as a queer person who has looked for counselors and other access to healthcare, even in Vancouver, which has one of the best jurisdictions when it comes to healthcare in BC, if you think about it. But there is no registry as such when it comes beyond counselors that say that they have dealt with queer issues, but there's no registry for doctors where we can know it is safe. And especially if you are trans, accessing healthcare can be a life or death situation. We need to change this system. Like, we have trans-specific care in Vancouver, but they are still seeking care through the cis-normative healthcare system, and they still have a bad time. So there is a vast inequality when it comes to accessing services as a queer person. And I have seen this time and time again amongst my friends, group, because and being part of this community, I have had to face these barriers, and I would have to agree with me when I go to see a doctor or things. My sexuality and who I am comes into question instead of first catering to my needs and my health needs. So I think there's a lot of changes that need to be made.
Thank you so much, Dr. Singh. Next up, Dr. Hedy Fry from the Liberal.
Thank you very much. I think this is a real issue. It's a very important problem to deal with. Access in rural communities to any kind of healthcare is often compromised, and it is even more so for persons in the LGBTQ2S community. But I do think that if we strengthen Medicare, which is what we are promising to do, and we put accountability onto it in the Canada Health Act, so that according to the Canada Health Act, nobody should be denied access to the care that they need because of where they live or ability to pay. So we are strengthening the Canada Health Act right now by putting clear accountability measures that will, in fact, penalizing provinces that fail to let this happen anywhere at all in their province. That's the first thing, implementing the Canada Health Act. The second thing I think is, I know many LGBTQ2+ people who are afraid in rural communities to come out or to even be known for who they are, mainly because communities are small and everybody knows each other, and there is a greater ability for discrimination and closeting to occur. What we have done is we've now put $55 million into helping communities across Canada, urban, rural, and elsewhere, to be able to look at the support systems they need to help LGBTQ communities to find safe spaces, to be able to get the help that they need. I think that's a really, really important piece of it. So there are many areas there's no one size fits all. What we have to do is address the various areas, starting a business, being able to have access to work, being able to access healthcare. And as I said, this is where I started, the lack of ability of access to healthcare to many people in the LGBTQ2+ community. So I will continue to fight for this. Our government is committed to dealing with this issue head on.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fry. Our last candidate on this question is Hannah Hodgson from the Conservatives. Hannah?
Thank you so much. This is an incredibly important question. I know from personal experience accessing gender affirming healthcare, in the last few years, it was incredibly difficult, and that was in an urban center. Year wait lists for intake appointments and prescription hormones. Multi-year wait lists for any surgical consultations. And again, that's in an urban center. In rural areas, those services simply, it's a desert, they don't exist. And I think that is a terrible situation that puts LGBTQ people in rural areas in extremely vulnerable positions. They're already, young people are scared and confused and worried about their future. They shouldn't have to be worried about accessing the healthcare that they need. So one of the things, as we know, healthcare is provincial jurisdiction. So one of the things in the Conservative platform is to significantly increase healthcare transfers, $60 billion over 10 years to provinces so they can better fund the services that people need. Because, a lot of these things, the federal government is figuring out what we can do in order to help meet the needs of the other levels of government to provide services for people. Because, like I said, I know so many people, so many friends and people, communities that had to leave rural areas, not because they wanted to, but because they simply couldn't access the services that they needed in those rural communities. And that is tragic. And I don't think that's what we want for our country. I think we want a standard of care all over our country, and a standard of care in which healthcare providers treat people with respect and treat people well. And that is something that I will commit to doing as an MP, to fighting for every day.
Thank you very much, Hannah. And thank you to the Fernie Pride Society for submitting that very important question. Our next set of questions comes from Rainbow Refugee, a Vancouver-based organization that supports people seeking refugee protection in Canada because of persecution based on sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, or HIV status. They ask, we are proud that all parties have signaled their support of 2S LGBTQI communities, and specifically LGBTQI refugees. Rainbow Refugee and its partners, the Rainbow Coalition for Refuge, have identified key priorities for safety and justice for LGBTQI refugees. We stand ready to work with any government, as we have with this current government. We know that available resettlement pathways remain extremely dangerous for LGBTQI refugees, that COVID has closed borders to refugees and created a 2-year backlog in cases, and the Safe Third Country Agreement disproportionately impacts LGBTQI refugees. How would your government uphold the right to refugee protection and ensure that pathways to Canada are safe, efficient, and supported? This question will first go to Dr. Daviani Singh from the Green Party. Dr. Singh, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I first want to say that I want to thank my Rainbow Refugee for doing the wonderful work that they do. I know personally people who have worked there, and I actually have friends who have come through the program to Canada. And so this is something that's personal to me, also as an immigrant from a country where until recently being queer was a crime. It was punishable by law. And so this is it is not safe for us, for a lot of us in our own countries, to be out and proud about who we are, to not be able to be with the people we love. That said, we should really make it easier for people who are at risk of death in their countries for being who they are and for who they love. And you know, we need to do a better job. We need to, when it comes to also safe country, we need to ensure that we remove those countries that aren't safe for LGBTQI people. Because I would say that under the previous government, even the US wasn't a safe space for them. So we need to really look at, when we're talking of refugee programs, look at it with the lens about what does it mean, especially if you are a queer person in that country. You know, and we should, the burden shouldn't be on the person fleeing persecution in their country. We should make it easier for this whole paperwork, and we should lessen the burden of proof required for the people fleeing. I'm truly worried, you know, about what's happening in Afghanistan, and especially for the queer people and the women in Afghanistan. How are they going to get to safe spaces? We need to fund the programs. There's an easy way how to clear the backlog. We can hire more people. We have money. We are a rich country. We should be able to help those in need, those whose literally their life is in danger if they continue to be where they are. So I promise, and I know the Green Party is deeply committed to these issues, and I think this would be a priority given my own personal experiences and how important this issue is to me.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Next up, Dr. Hedy Fry.
Thank you. That is a really important question. I remember in the late 1990s, bringing in Iranians who were being beheaded, who were being hung in the square and stoned, to help us to circumvent and to cut through the red tape to get them here so that they could be safe. I think our government has shown its commitment to discrimination, fear, and persecution based on LGBTQ status, on gender identity and gender expression over all of the years. We first started this in the 1990s when we were bringing in people as refugees, when the UNHCR did not recognize refugees because of their sexual orientation or their gender expression or identity. We overcame that, and we did it as a Canadian foreign policy. Right now, we have shown our commitment to bringing refugees in. In fact, the first year we became government in 2015, we were transition, we're working hard to get up to scratch as a new government, and yet we brought in 25,000 Syrian refugees. Until then, we have continued to work, and now we have brought in 75,000 Syrian refugees. And we've seen that during the 10 years that they were there, the Conservatives only brought in about 2,500 refugees. This is a commitment we have to bring in refugees based on their gender identity, sexual orientation, and based on people whose lives are in great danger. And moving forward is a priority where we are pushing those kinds of refugees straight ahead into a system that is very overloaded now. There are 81 million migrants around the world who are seeking a place to live. So this is a huge problem that we have to deal with.
Thank you, Dr. Fry. Next, we go to Hannah Hodgson from the Conservatives.
Thank you so much. And thank you for Rainbow Refugee for all the hard work they do. I'm a big fan, and one of my friends, close friends, Michelle Rempel-Garner, I always went to fight for them, and then they introduced a motion in the House to make it a permanent program a few years ago, a motion that the Liberals voted against, but and I'm glad to see and our platform commits to enshrining it and making it a bigger part of our refugee program. You know, there's a ubiquitous experience I think that all LGBTQ people have had, which is when people who aren't LGBTQ don't really understand, which is when you're looking at traveling, there's a list of countries where it's safe to go. And the list of countries where it's safe to go is a lot shorter than where it's not safe. And I think that shows us how dangerous much of the world is to LGBTQ people. And we need to bring in more refugees. We need to, from the community, and figure out a way to make people safe. One of the things that Conservatives are committing to do that I'm very proud of is to change the way refugees work, because right now, if you're in a country where you're discriminated against, you have to go to another country in order to make a refugee claim. So sometimes that's very difficult for people to escape the dangerous circumstances. So our platform at Canada's Recovery Plan, we are committing to allowing people to claim refugee status for situations like discrimination from being LGBTQ. from their home country in order to apply for refugee status in Canada. That's very important, and it will help to protect so many more people who are facing extremely dangerous circumstances all over the world, and I'm happy to fight for that.
Thank you, Hannah. And finally, our next candidate for this question is Brianne Ouellette of the Ndp.
Thank you. I said it in the last election at Proud2Vote 2019, and I'm saying it again right now. The New Democratic Party fights to ensure that refugee safety comes first in all federal policies and agreements impacting refugees as marginalized people. Refugees who belong to the rainbow community face compounded oppression. As such, I believe that the federal government must meet a very high standard to protect the safety of all rainbow refugees. The Safe Third Country Agreement with the United States must be suspended. I said it before, I'm saying it again. This position is supported by Amnesty International and the BC Liberties Association. The US is not a safe place for members of the rainbow community. Despite this, the Liberals and Conservatives have already shown that they won't do this. We must not throw vulnerable people to the wolves. We must do this by suspending the Safe Third Country Agreement. The NDP also has a plan to address the backlog of asylum seekers that continue to grow under the Liberals. We will fix inefficiencies in the system to get rid of the backlog and work with Canadians to resettle refugees in our communities. But nothing happens on thoughts and prayers. So the NDP will pay for it with slightly higher taxes on the highest tax bracket. On average, only $2 per day extra for people who earn more than $216,000 per year. This small increase on the wealthiest will ensure fairness, respect, and dignity for all refugees, including those from the rainbow community. That is my commitment to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Brianne. Our next question is a follow-up to the one that we just asked, and it's a combination question from both community and rainbow refugee. The recent withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan has led to the return of the Taliban and created a humanitarian crisis. Currently speaking, there are already many displaced LGBTQ+ refugees that are hoping to resettle safely in Canada, with many stuck due to low processing time. With the Afghanistan crisis right now, many Afghan LGBTQ+ refugees need help reaching safety urgently. How is your government going to process the applications of the many Afghan vulnerable refugees? And how would it affect current LGBTQ+ refugees who've been waiting for years to settle in a safe country? This time we are going to start with Dr. Hedy Fry. Dr. Fry, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I think that's an important question because there is no hierarchy when it comes to people whose lives are at risk, whether they be Afghan LGBTQ or Afghan refugees who helped the Canadians during the, during the war in Afghanistan. So all are deemed to be equally at risk. And we have made a commitment to move forward on this issue in Afghanistan. In order to do that, we've had to put aside a lot of our resources and the people that are working on citizenship and immigration to deal only with Afghanistan and with LGBTQ refugees and of course with Afghans who are left there. As you know, there's a problem. The Taliban will not allow them to leave anymore. And so we have done work and are in fact working with the surrounding countries to try and get them through the third country to get into Canada. In fact, very recently, about 2 days ago, 57 Afghan refugees came in to Calgary Airport. And this is how we're going to have to do it. There's no magic. It has to be moving people through everywhere we can, every place we can, and through every loophole that we can find. And so this is something, again, once again, that our Prime Minister, all of us are committed to.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fry. We're now going to go to Hannah Hodgson with the Conservatives.
Thank you. I think we all watched the horror of what happened over the last month or so in Afghanistan. And, I think that many Canadians are wondering, why did the Prime Minister call an election when such a crisis was happening? And maybe we, could have done more, as we all heard terrible stories coming out of Afghanistan of people being left behind. And I think, frankly, we need stronger leadership to help people in these situations. Similar to my last answer, I think that we really need to help people in vulnerable situations as a significant part of our immigration and foreign policy, and streamlining refugees protests, focusing on private refugees as opposed to public is a big deal that is in our conservative platform, because as Rainbow Refugee Program shows, if you have private sponsorships, it allows people to come in with more support and more community building as soon as people arrive. And I think that will make a huge difference in people's lives. But ultimately, yes, we need to help the people of Afghanistan, help LGBTQ refugees, help all more refugees, help the people who helped us in fighting during the war. And I think that unfortunately the unnecessary election that we're in right now made that more difficult. But I commit as an MP to doing all I can in order to help those vulnerable people.
Thank you, Hannah. Next up, we go to Brianne Ouellette of the Ndp. Brianne?
Thank you. I first stated my beliefs on this when I spoke to a crowd of worried Afghan families and allies gathered on the steps of the Vancouver Art Gallery on August 28th. I believe that Western nations, including Canada, failed the people of Afghanistan. I think we are complicit and responsible. We allowed this to happen. We occupied a country without knowing enough about its people, power dynamics, and history. And even worse, we left without any proper transition plan. I was outraged to see our Prime Minister calling an election on the day that Kabul fell into the hands of the Taliban. I was embarrassed to see Canada sending special forces in to bring our diplomats to safety while Afghans were clinging to military aircraft and falling to their deaths. I was shocked to learn that Canada withdrew before the deadline and only saved 3,700 people before August 31st. I must vehemently disagree with Dr. Fry. We must not look at individual we must look at individual circumstances to protect the urgently vulnerable on priority. Her statement that we manage this on a first come first served basis is an ugly position to hold. We must not apply the same years-long application process to Afghan rainbow community refugees who urgently need protection. We must revise and streamline the process. I will work as the MP for Vancouver Centre to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Brianne. And I'll give Dr. Fry 30 seconds actually just to respond, since there was, I know you remembered there's no crosstalk. So
yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I think I did not say that we're going on a first come, first serve basis. I said when anybody's life is at stake, there is no hierarchy. That we must take everyone whose lives are in danger as absolutely deserving of our emergency effort. That's what I did say, Brianne, and not what you interpreted me as having said.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Fry. And let's move along now to Dr. Daviani Singh, who has the last answer on this question.
Thank you. As future MP, what I would do is I would push Parliament to really, first of all, we do need to prioritize the situation in Afghanistan and the people most at risk. But just because we prioritize does not mean that we have to forget the other people or they have to be deprioritized. Like anything else, like everything out there, all we need is more funding, and we do have this funding. We are just putting our money in the wrong places, and the government wastes a lot of money on useless things that are harmful. And this is a policy choice. So we can prioritize, and that does not mean that the other people waiting in line for 2 years have to be deprioritized. I'm really worried about the people in Afghanistan. We say that they can come here, but what about to get here? How are they going to get here? How are they going to get to the plains? Once they get to the plains, where are they going to go? Like we said, this third country safe place is not really safe for a lot of queer people. And I do want to say that this whole issue created in the first place is a result of colonialism. And we have to understand how deep systemic racism and colonialism goes all over. From personal experience, I can say that queer and trans people have existed in a lot of societies before white supremacy came and the colonial aspect came to those countries. So we need to keep that in mind too. So I will push government to prioritize and to increase the funding for all refugees that need to get here, because for them it is literally a life or death situation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Singh, and thank you to Rainbow Refugee for the question. Our next question is also from Community, BC's Queer, Trans, and Two-Spirit Resource Center. Community asks, community staff and board were both saddened and frustrated when Bill C6, an act to amend the criminal code to ban the harmful practice of conversion therapy for minors, died in the Senate when this election was called. Conversion therapy, otherwise known as sexual orientation and gender identity change efforts, is a discredited and dangerous practice that significantly harms the self-esteem of those who are subjected to it. It's been described as torture. It's long past time that queer youth are protected from this. And in our view, it's shameful the last parliament failed to get this done. Now, to all parties, what excuse do you have for failing to protect vulnerable LGBTQ2SIA+ youth from this dangerous practice in the last parliament, or dangerous practice, sorry, there's a typo there. Why was this not more of a priority in the last parliament, and what will you do in the next parliament to finally get this done? The first question will go to Hannah Hodgson from the Conservatives. Hannah, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much for the question. And just to start, to be very clear, conversion therapy is an abhorrent practice that has no place in Canada. The idea that any so-called therapy could change or even would seek to change an innate characteristic of who I am and who many people are is disgusting. And I would look forward to being a member of parliament and to voting to ban it, as the Conservative platform has committed to banning it very clearly. To be clear, the reason we're in this situation is because of the Liberal government. They first rejected NDP calls to ban conversion therapy, then finally introducing a bill that died on the floor because they prorogued the House to avoid testimony on the WE scandal. Then they introduced the bill again, had debate, went to committee. When it came out of committee, they didn't call it for debate for 3 months so that they could call it only on the eve of the summer break, move it, and then let it, and then use it as a political wedge in an election, let it die during the summer without it passing the Senate in order to call this unnecessary election. The NDP offered the Liberal Party to invoke time allocation, to invoke cloture on the bill to speed it up. The Liberals refused. The reality is we could have had conversion therapy banned in Canada if the Liberal government had cared to accelerate the bill, had cared to not call it for 3 months, had cared to not to try to use it as a political wedge. I'm tired of these things being used as political wedges, and I look forward to voting to ban conversion therapy as soon as possible because it has no place in Canada. Absolutely not.
Now, Hannah, I'm going to ask you a follow-up only because you do still have time on the clock.
Yeah, okay.
There are many people who are going to ask you, because there are MPs who serve with the Conservative Party who have, very much opposed a ban on what we're talking about here today. How do you circle that square?
What I say is that many Conservatives voted for the ban, including my leader, Erin O'Toole. Had I been an MP, I would have voted for the ban. I will vote for the ban as an MP in the future. And our platform is very clear that we'll ban conversion therapy. Canada's recovery plan is what I am campaigning on. Erin O'Toole is my leader, and that's who I'm fighting for.
All right, thank you, Hannah. Thank you very much. Our next question goes to Brianne Ouellette of the Ndp. Brianne?
Thank you, Hannah, for what you just said. I agree that this should be a nonpartisan issue. I was incredibly angered by the callous manner in which this selfish election was called while such an important bill was before the Senate. No attempt was made to get this bill passed before the election was called, even though there was time to make it happen, as Hannah was gracious to recognize. The NDP tried. I was also incredibly disturbed as Bill C6 progressed through the parliamentary process. Too many compromises were being made with the Conservatives. The activists who fought hard for this bill were slowly being failed by the Liberal baby step approach. I have presented to the public, additionally, a pattern of Dr. Hedy Fry failing to protect all children as Vancouver Centre's MP since the last election. As one example, Dr. Fry refused to sponsor, not sign, but sponsor Bobby B's House of Commons petition to make changes to military law to protect military dependents from sexual assault on military bases. Dr. Fry declined to sponsor that petition for the stated reason that there are no military bases in Vancouver Centre. So a Conservative MP stepped up to sponsor that petition. Voters should be concerned about her commitment to seeing Bill C6 fully implemented as intended. The people of Vancouver Centre know from my work at the National Inquiry, no matter which party forms government, I will fight harder than anyone to bring that bill back to the table and to ensure that it meets the original spirit and highest protection of vulnerable children. All children matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Brianne. Next up, we will go to Dr. Daviani Singh from the Greens. Dr. Singh, you have 2 minutes.
This is a valid question, and there is no reason that this bill should have been delayed. It is deeply personal for me. I have had friends that have been forced through conversion therapy, and I've ended up with major mental issues, and I even lost a friend to suicide because of this. And to see that the two major parties have delayed bringing this up, and then and then they say they claim to care about human rights, but at the same time delay it, or almost so many of their caucus vote against it. This is not okay. The Greens have been deeply committed to this. Even in BC, the BC Greens had put the bill forward and the BC Ndp killed it. I do not understand why this has not been passed sooner. This is a matter of policy and priorities, and it shows where all these other parties think this falls. This is a major issue. Young people are being forced into situations that are long-term traumatizing and can even lead to their death. I will not allow for this. I will bring it up every possible time in Parliament, and I will be a pain in the ass until this bill gets passed.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Now over to Dr. Fry, who, of course, you've been in the hot seat about this topic, facing pointed comments from all of the other candidates here. Your response?
My response is simply this. We are in a minority government, or we were in the last session. That meant that we were at the mercy and the agreements of all the opposition parties. In order to put a bill on the floor of the House of Commons, you have to have unanimous support. This bill was pushed back further and further by the Conservatives every time. When it did come back, what we saw was that it was allowed to come on to vote late in the game, very late in the game. We brought that bill in very early and it kept being delayed by the Conservatives. Now, what has happened is that the bill was passed in the House of Commons. It now was going to sit in the Senate for the Senate to pass it. The Conservative members of the Senate blocked the bill from coming to debate and blocked the bill from moving forward. What we will promise is that in the first 100 days of forming a government, we will bring this bill back, and we will therefore move forward to ensure that it passes. And I think this is the important thing to know. How the House of Commons works and how things happen is important. Anyone can say whatever they wish, but that's not how it was, and that's not how it worked. And I wanted to say to Ms. Hodgson that 62 members of the Conservative Party voted against this particular bill, and that is shameful. I think we know, as a physician, I know there is absolutely no scientific merit in conversion therapy. And it not only harms people, but the mental health of many people who have had to undergo conversion therapy. And in fact, suicidal ideation occurs. Many people have actually committed suicide as a result of being forced into this arena. This is something we are committed to. And without trying to hit people, I know everyone loves to take pot shots, but the NDP did support this. And I think the Greens did support it. So I am just saying that if we have a government and we don't have too many Conservatives to block us, we bring this forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know that was a hard question for all of you, and I think a very important one for our community. So I'm going to, I just want to thank you all for, looking into this important topic to protect queer youth. Our next question comes from the Loud Business Association, which works to promote and connect LGBTQ+ business owners. They ask, about 1 in every 40 Canadian businesses are LGBTQSAI+ owned or operated. How will your government ensure that the procurement process, regardless of size of opportunity, is equitable, fair, and easily accessible by gender and sexually diverse Canadians? What metrics will your government use to determine the success and social impact of procurement process with regards to ensuring all Canadians, regardless of sexual or gender identity, have an equal opportunity to participate? And the first shot at answering this now goes back to Brianne Ouellette of the NDP for 2 minutes.
Thank you. I know as a former small business owner, a former management leadership team member with the Métis Nation Saskatchewan, and as a lawyer, that ensuring equitable, fair, and easily accessible procurement opportunities requires setting targets, reviewing performance at achieving those targets, and then adjusting actions to better achieve those targets. I know that the targets need to be equal to the percentage of people in the rainbow community as compared to the overall population of Canada, which is 3.3 out of 100. This means that a target of 1 out of 40 isn't good enough. That's only 2.5%. We need to achieve equality. We need to set a target of 3.3 out of every 100 procurement contracts being awarded to rainbow community business owners. That's the metric. Then the government needs to review its contracts on a regular basis. If any regular review of historical data shows that the rate is lower than 3.3 out of 100, then the government must adjust its award process to give more contracts to rainbow community business owners. If we fall short in one quarter, then we need to make up for it in the next. That's the right way to do this. That's the way we encourage more business opportunities and more businesses run by members of the rainbow community. That's the standard that I will champion for rainbow community business owners as Vancouver Centre's Member of Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brianne. Next, we go to Dr. Daviani Singh from the Green Party.
Thank you. I would like to begin by saying I do agree with Green on all things you mentioned, the measures that are the basic measures that we should begin. But coming from a place where we have a quota system, and you were saying that we should have a minimum quota, I feel that unless we have a proper way to measure it and track it and data to see that it is actually working, given how corrupt systems are, it could just become tokenistic support that actually doesn't end up supporting the community. So not only do we need to ensure that we have a quota, but we also need to have data for how is the system going. We need to track on it so we know what's working and where are these gaps that exist. And historically, we have seen oppression and exclusion in the system, especially when it comes to the queer community. And this is something that I think we need to work, and we need to ensure that there are avenues for participation and for all businesses, not just for queer, but also historically run by marginalized people that have been traditionally excluded. So that is what I would push for, is have the basic quotas, but we need to ensure and have a way of measuring and tracking that this is actually working and the support is going to the community, and it's just not more tokenism and lip service as we have seen governments pay to all other policies.
Thank you so much, Dr. Singh.
So if I may just interject, as Dr. Hedy Fry was able to before, I think we're in agreement. I think when I talked about a review process, that was the intended implication. Thank you.
Thank you, Brianne, and thank you for being respectful about it. Next up, let's go to Dr. Fry.
Thank you. I think it's very clear. I think we're all in agreement with this, that we need to measure, we need to set indicators, and we need to have clear measurable goals for where we're going when we talk about inclusion and diversity. We have a Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Youth, and she has a clear mandate. So our platform is the only platform of any political party that in every sector and in every segment have a diversity impact statement made. In other words, we use a lens to measure how it would impact all of the diverse populations, whether they're Indigenous, LGBTQ, gender, or whatever other diversities we have, racialized people, etc. This is a really important thing, and we've put it in every element of our platform because we want to make a difference when we want to be able to measure what we do. Having an all-of-government approach is really very important, and this is something that we have put into our gender inclusion and diversity statement as well, of our diversity inclusion statement. It says that every department must take its look at everything through that diversity lens, that it cannot just do something and say, well, this has nothing to do with me. Every department must measure and have a diversity impact statement and a measurement. I think that would make the kind of difference we're talking about and we're looking for. And I know that we're the only party that has that.
Thank you, Dr. Fry. Now let's go to Hannah Hodgson from the Conservative.
Thank you so much for the question. And first of all, I'd like to agree with Brianne. I think 1 in 40 is too low. I think, queer community, we're very entrepreneurial, and I think we could, good amounts, we can get that number higher. We do need to fix procurement. Ultimately, it's a major problem. Government procurement has, could go on about the problems of government procurement for a while. I won't do that in this case, but I will say that before we can fix specific targets in procurement, we need to make sure procurement as a whole is more transparent and less the government giving deals to their friends, frankly, because as we've seen with the SNC-Lavalin, as we saw with the WE scandal, the amount of small sole source contracts that WE was getting that came under the transparency level, and a former Liberal MP, his company getting a massive ventilator contract. Those things shouldn't be happening. And that's why the Conservative Party will put in strict transparency and anti-corruption practices so that we can make sure that when we are doing procurement, it is being done for the proper reasons and the right reasons, which is to get services and supplies for government, but also to support Canadian businesses that need the support and deserve the support, and not just the friends of the Liberal Party who happen to be the government of the day.
Thank you, Hannah, for your answer on that question. And thank you to Loud Business Association for posing that important question. Our next question comes from Pride at Work Canada, which is an organization that empowers employers to build workplaces that celebrate all employees, regardless of gender expression, gender identity, and sexual orientation. They ask, according to the Wage Report and the Trans Pulse Canada report, 2S LGBTQIA+ people are more economically marginalized, especially bisexual, trans, disabled, and racialized queer communities. What will your party steward to address workplace discrimination and economic justice for 2S LGBTQIA+ communities? And how will your party support and uplift 2S LGBTQ+ small businesses, particularly racialized and trans small business owners? The question first goes to Dr. Daviani Singh from the Green Party for 2 minutes.
Thank you. This is a situation that is all too real, and it's a precarity of life for queer and trans people, especially when one is racialized. And this is very important in addressing the primary step. The way I see it and what I would promote for, it starts with a policy around guaranteed livable income. We need food security, housing security, and housing affordability, because that's what gives people the freedom to work. Personally, I can tell you, I have faced, as a queer woman of color, when it comes to working in corporate society, I've faced discrimination. I've had to quit a job before, and HR doesn't really end up helping you, especially when you're also a person of color. They end up supporting their own businesses. So maybe we need systems where we can have a public HR to report to when you have workplace discrimination, because often they tend to take the side of organizations, and I've seen this in academia as well. So we need to be, I think there is a gap here. There is so much focus on DEI training in businesses and companies these days, but it is not working. And so we need to find a new approach. And we need a lot more professionals to provide the support in this space. So I would like to see, I'm not an expert on what we could have, but I do know that I would reach out to experts in this area to see how is it that they say that we can reduce this discrimination that is faced in the community, and the cycle does not continue going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Next up, we go to Dr. Hedy Fry from the Liberal.
Thank you very much. I go back to the whole basic idea that you have got to be able to look at indicators. You've got to be able to measure what you're doing. We've been doing this now for quite a while. We've been looking at how to do institutional change and systemic discrimination. And to do that, it has to be looking at a diversity impact statement and analyzing it with that lens. We have been doing that. And I wanted to just point out that, when we talk about the LGBTQ2+ community, they're not just characterized by being LGBTQ2+, they're also racialized people in the LGBTQ community. There are people who are women, gender. So we need to take that broad lens and look at everything we look at with the broad lens of gender and diversity and race and that's the only way we're going to knock institutional and systemic discrimination off. I think the other thing is we, during COVID, came up and did something very important and very interesting. We helped everybody who had lost their job. We helped families to put food on the table. We had wage supplements. We kept businesses open, and we did that without discrimination and with a gender impact lens to make sure that nobody was left behind. For instance, we know that a lot of gig workers and a lot of contract workers don't have access to EI. So we brought in access to EI, and now we're going to put this in place, if we form a government, clearly in legislation and in regulations, so that we can continue to measure and continue to move forward to help communities be able to have access to work, to be able to have support when they lose their jobs, and to be able to have that ability to be employed in a safe way. We're moving forward right now, and we're doing so in the last session when we were looking at how the public service uses impact lens to hire not only federal workers, but to hire workers in areas where there is federal regulations and federal legislation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We now will go to Hannah Hodgson from the Conservatives. Hannah?
Thank you so much. I think I just want to start by saying, it's obvious that no one should face discrimination in any place, at work or otherwise. And I think the fact that it's still happening, this means we have a lot more work to do. And I'm committed to working towards a future where those things don't happen. A lot of employment standards are provincial, but I think what the federal government can do is, set a tone for federal regulated workers and make sure that, there are protections in place. In terms of supporting small businesses and supporting LGBTQ small businesses and all these things, and as you said, poverty rates are higher. I think the Trans Pulse story, I think I was actually one of the people who submitted to that, is that anti-poverty actions and anti-homelessness actions will disproportionately help the LGBTQ community because they disproportionately experiences these challenges. So if we commit to build more homes, to make housing more affordable, accessible, if we commit to building an economy and growing Main Street and helping Main Street businesses to grow, it'll disproportionately help LGBTQ people because they're the ones that are often in most difficult of circumstances. So that's what I'm committed to helping grow our economy, helping alleviate the challenges that people face, and helping to create a better country, because all of the situations that are putting people in vulnerable positions disproportionately affect the LGBTQ community. And we have to remember that when making any decisions, because that's a crucial thing and a lens to look through, intersectional lens to look at things through.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And finally, we go to Brianne Ouellette from the Ndp. Brianne.
Thank you. As a lawyer, I see that the other candidates have missed a very important aspect of this problem. We are talking about human rights violations. And Access to justice remains an incredibly difficult problem across Canada. People need to have the ability to take employers to court or to a tribunal to fight on equal footing, and they can't do it if they don't have access to those systems of justice. Human rights violations and chronic wage inequality impact especially hard on bisexual, trans, disabled, and racialized queer communities. I will personally fight as an MP to create more federal access to justice programs so that marginalized people can have the resources to have their workplace discrimination cases heard. Additionally, as I said in this Proud2Vote in 2019, New Democrats believe that small businesses should have access to all the support they need to grow, innovate, and stay competitive in Canada and around the world. In the federal government, New Democrats will keep working hard for small businesses to tackle issues that impact their bottom line. Our plan for public universal dental, eye, mental, and pharmacare will also save businesses significant money while providing employers with extended health benefits every year. Everyone knows that the NDP will work hardest to ensure that marginalized people are protected. We've always fought for the underdog. We fought hard to ensure that the Liberals worked to provide the best supports during the pandemic, and we will keep doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Brianne. And just wanted to remind everyone that there is support standing by for anyone who needs to speak to someone as a result of any issues that are being discussed tonight. You can reach out to Nazanin at 613-604-5024. Once again, that's 613-604-5024. Our next question comes on behalf of the Community-Based Research Center, or CBRC, an organization that promotes the health of gay, bi, trans, two-spirit, and queer men through research and intervention development. They ask, in 2013, for reasons that are unclear, Health Canada initiated enforcement of a ban on the sale of poppers, which GBT2Q people have been using for decades to enjoy safe sex. The ban harmed many queer-owned small businesses and created a potentially unsafe black market. Community-Based Research Center calling on Health Canada to lift the ban so Canadians can access safe supplies. Will your party commit to lifting the ban on poppers? We are first going to go to Dr. Hedy Fry.
Thank you very much. Alkyl nitrates are what poppers are really called in medicine and in pharmaceutical world. It is under a section of the Food and Drug Administration, which makes it only available through a prescription. We know that in the past, some of these drugs have been available through a circuitous route that was not a prescription. The thing about alkyl nitrites is that it does have a very strong physiological effect on the heart, on blood pressure, and on other elements of the cardiovascular system. It, in fact, if you use these nitrites for too long, if you use them in people who are taking different medication, if you use them in people who have a higher exposure, and this cannot be controlled, the use of poppers, so that one may get an overdose. I think this can be quite fatal. Because it's a prescription drug, the government of Canada, and well, not the government of Canada, but the arm's length body that looks at drugs is prepared to look at if some company brings forward poppers in a real form. It can be assessed, it can be evaluated, all of the scientific rigor can go through, and then this can happen. So far, we have not had such a request from any company to bring about poppers in a safe way so that we can look at it and make sure that it is safe or not. As a physician, I must say that the safety of anybody's life and health is really important to anything I would condone.
So to be clear, Dr. Fry, you know, as it sort of stands, the enforcement of the sale of poppers as it's been sort of available, you're not for it then? You're in favor of a more regulated approach?
Absolutely, I'm in favor of a regulated approach because of safety reasons. I think that if a company wants to bring forward, they're free to bring forward to the Food and Drug administration the ability to look at the safety issues on anything that they provide. We've not had any company bring that forward. I think that it would be great if somebody brought forward such a drug, looking at some of the concerns that people have, the adverse concerns on their health. And for me, this is about health.
Thank you, Dr. Fry. Next up, Hannah Hodgson from the Conservative.
Thank you so much. And for the second time in this debate, I'm going to give a shout out to my good friend, Michelle Rempel-Garner, who has recently brought this issue to the forefront by writing a letter to the health minister just before the election saying, we need a review of this. We need justifications for this. We need better data, because a huge problem, and I think everyone will know about this, is that due to discrimination, we don't have a ton of good research data on health impacts of LGBTQ people and LGBTQ issues. And so I think we need to take a look at this and find out the justifications for it, because frankly, we need to make sure that we are doing what we can to support the LGBT community in healthcare. And I'm proud that my leader has committed to doing so in order to, proactively, not just sitting around and waiting for someone to bring a drug, but proactively looking at, okay, what are the arguments for? What are the arguments again? Can this be done in a healthy way? Can we make sure that people get support they need? I wish we would take the similar tactic on a blood ban, but so far this government is content to just sit back and let Canadian Blood Services decide to keep this homophobic and transphobic policy that has no place in 2021. But again, Conservative Party will take proactive action to end the blood ban and to search and to seek and review the information on alkyl nitrates on poppers to make sure that the LGBTQ community is being supported in any way we can.
Thank you, Hannah. Now let's go over to Brianne Ouellette of the NDP. Brianne?
Thank you. I sang about decriminalization and safe supply in my intro. It is a commitment that I speak about everywhere. Here's why. Drugs aren't killing 8,000 people across Canada in 2021. Policymakers are killing these 8,000 people. We need new policymakers. We will get there by electing the new Democratic Party to change this problem from criminalization to a healthcare approach. We need to decriminalize all possession of drugs, and we need safe supply, universal safe supply of all drugs. This will eliminate the need for a black market. This will also protect people who are relying on more dangerous alternatives to poppers. Dr. Fry admitted, people are using it. And because it's illegal, they can't go to their family doctor to consult on the risks. Instead, they're relying on the dangerous black market alternatives without any recourse. We shouldn't make people more vulnerable through drug policy. As the MP for Vancouver Centre, I will fight to enact a healthcare approach in Canada, which is proven elsewhere in the world: decriminalization and safe supply. Thank you.
Now, Brianne, only because I saw that you made it, talked about safe supply of drugs in general, but just specifically about poppers, your support to, stopping this sort of enforcement of the ban, lifting the ban on poppers as well.
Yes, we need to lift it. All drugs, universal safe supply. If we know that people are using the drugs, then we need to make sure that it's addressed as a health issue, that they have medical care. We need to provide options. Thank you.
Thank you, Brianne. And finally, let's go to Dr. Daviani Singh from the Green Party.
Thank you. And I will begin by saying that I totally agree with Brianne on decriminalization and safe supply. I'm not sure that the Green Party has an official policy on poppers ban, but I do commit working with all MPs to lift the poppers ban. As Brianne also mentioned, and we have seen it, that prohibition time and time again has shown that it encourages unsafe use. It creates black markets. Prohibition doesn't, and banning something doesn't stop access. It just makes the access more dangerous and unsafe. The Green Party supports decriminalization and safe supply of all drugs. That would include poppers, and I would personally ensure that it includes poppers in that policy, because safe supply means ensuring that the use is done safely, and that is the way forward. These are public health issues. These are not criminal issues. and they should not be treated as such.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. And thank you, CBRC, for the question and for also advocating for this issue. I have to tell you, I think as queer people, to see these issues being spoken about on a larger scale in mainstream media, it's certainly something for representation. So thank you to all of you for your thoughtful answers. Our next question comes from Community BC's Queer, Trans, and Two-Spirit Resource Center. They ask, in light of the events of last year, specifically the discovery of thousands of children's graves at the sites of former residential schools across Canada, how does your party operationalize truth and reconciliation? If elected, what community level actions would you take to realize truth and reconciliation? The first the first chance to answer this question goes to Hannah Hodgson with the Conservatives. Hannah, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I just want to start by speaking about, the discoveries or a somber reminder of the tragic circumstances of residential schools and the deep seated trauma that they give to many Indigenous Canadians, all Indigenous Canadians still to this day. And we need to do more. As a clearly white person, my job is to listen to Indigenous communities and Indigenous peoples about what they need and their trauma and how we can move forward together. I think that's incredibly important. And, the Conservatives have called for swift action on TRC recommendations 71 to 76 involving missing children to help provide healing to families. But ultimately, I think what we need to do is, I think that so far this government and, Canada has shown that, there's focus on, frankly, the easier ones. A national holiday for truth and reconciliation is a great idea. Every MP voted for it. I support it. It's a great idea. But it doesn't solve drinking clean water advisories. It doesn't solve the issues of lack of economic opportunities. It doesn't solve the deep-seated generational trauma that exists in Indigenous nations. We need to get to work to do the hard work to solve these issues and listen to Indigenous communities and work together to achieve true reconciliation, because only then will the real work be able to be done and the true healing to begin.
Thank you, Hannah. We now go to Brianne Ouellette of the Ndp. Brianne, you have 2 minutes. Brianne, you are on mute. It was going to happen once. It was going to happen once.
Yeah, it always does. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. As an Indigenous person, I watched with keen interest when the House of Commons, a few weeks after the initial 215 children announcement, the NDP put a motion forward to end punitive litigation tactics against Indigenous children and residential school survivors by Crown prosecutors in federal court. And 89 Liberals joined all the other parties to unanimously pass that motion. But some Liberals sat silent. Some Liberals abstained. And one of those Liberals was Dr. Hedy Fry. And to date, she hasn't provided a reason for why she didn't join. She wasn't part of cabinet. She wasn't whipped. It was a voluntary decision. And people across Vancouver Centre are asking, why did you abstain on protecting children? Vulnerable Indigenous children who get funded at 70% of other children across this country, and done just weeks after we learned about the growing number of bodies secretly buried across this country. The way we get reconciliation is through justice. And the way we get justice is when the federal government and every MP protects our children, and they're still not doing it. Everyone knows that I will fight for that tooth and nail. Thank you.
Thank you, Brianne. Next, we will go to Dr. Daviani Singh from the Green Party. Dr. Singh?
Thank you. And, I totally agree with you, Breen, that there were a number of liberals who sat out and, abstained from it. I also want to say that, these numbers of the children, that it's been increasing. And the first part about truth is understanding and recognizing that, our past genocide, but the ongoing genocide, and how so many of our policies right now are genocidal. And we need to stop these practices. Currently, our government still continues these practices, as we can see, of forced sterilization in the Indigenous community, separation of children from their families. This is still genocide and the same, colonialism that is being pushed forward by the parties in government. And what I want to do as a settler from a colonized nation is I do not want to partake in this recolonizing of this of the Indigenous people. Indigenous people don't have access to the same rights, and that is obvious. And we need to start combating that at the community level. And community level actions start with basic equity and safety. We have to take it into our personal work. We have to help other settlers learn the truth, so the burden of this is not all on Indigenous people. The point is to not sit around and feel guilty. It is to take action, do something to break the pattern. But this starts with Canadians facing the truth that we live in a colonial country, in a patriarchal society. And so I'm truly committed to this. And I really hope that I can work with Indigenous people as we go forward, because this is a very important issue and we need to stop this genocide.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. And now we go to Dr. Fry.
Question, and I'm going to answer it. The reason I abstained was that this was a motion brought in by the New Democratic Party in the House. And there were some components of it that were great. I liked some of the concepts of that motion. There were some that were concerning me because, for instance, residential schools were looking at residents who live there all the time and who were subject to such awful practices. And then there were the day kids. And what happened was that the tribunal had suggested that everyone should get the same amount of recompense. I found that if you just were in there for maybe a few days and then you were there for years, living, sleeping and everything, that in fact the trauma you suffered may be even greater than if you were just a day student. I wanted to look at that because the judicial and the courts asked if we looked at this so it could be fair to everyone who was going to get compensation. I was torn. And so when you're torn, you abstain, because I don't want to say yes to something that I felt had negative repercussions or no to something that I felt had positive repercussions. So I abstained for that simple reason. I am still looking at the issue. We are taking it to a judicial inquiry to ensure that that equality and fairness comes about in the compensation given to the kids. I also wanted to say one very important thing about Indigenous people. It is about creating a relationship if we're going to deal with truth and reconciliation. It's a journey. And we talk a lot about colonialization. Colonialization was telling Indigenous people who they were, what they had to do and when they had to do it. I think we came in 2015, we passed UNDRIP, we brought in the Truth and Reconciliation Day, which is the 30th of September, for the first time this year, we will have that, in which people can speak the truth, Canadians can listen and understand what really happened during that time, and the sorrow and the exploitation of generations. So we need to work in partnership with Indigenous peoples, and we're doing that.
May I respond?
Sure, I'll give you 30 seconds, Breen.
Thank you. Dr. Fry has only addressed residential schools. She hasn't addressed the children across this country, Indigenous children who are funded at 70% of other Canadian children. And she's made the assumption that the limit that the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal can award is sufficient. It's nowhere near sufficient. She is miserly and she is harming children. And that is my position on this.
Dr. Fry, did you want to respond to that as well?
Well, first and foremost, one of the things that I find very difficult is that we can agree on what we do, how we do it, and the policies we do to make change happen. I think the personal sort of vilification of people thinking they know me because they're running against me is something that really makes me I'm sad. I think it's unfair to go personal when you do this. Let's talk about the policies. I did not say that there were limits. I said that it was not fair and an equitable
Thank you,
result.
Dr. Fry.
That's all I
Thank
said.
you. All right, these are important topics. And so I just want to once again, thank you for, not speaking over each other and for us having an opportunity to have this important conversation. But let's move on to our last sort of scheduled question of the evening. Once again, this comes from Community, but specifically from Community's Seniors Program. And they ask, while there are laws that outlaw discrimination, what would your party do to ensure that there are policies and procedures that are proactive in recognizing the interests of members of the queer communities? For example, ensuring that seniors entering long-term care are invited to name the members of their chosen families that must be recognized as visitors and other important contacts. The question first goes to Brianne Ouellette of the Ndp.
Well, we're coming full circle from what we've talked about today. I started at the top talking about my childhood friend, who I'm calling Tim, and the problems that he's had with the medical community and the inability to find justice in that. And I talked about how there's a lack of access to justice in this country, and seniors have a lack of access to justice. So we need to take those pieces and bring them together so that seniors also have access to justice and they have the ability to actually hold medical practitioners to account for trying to refuse them their human rights and their dignity. On top of that, it's about working with other levels of government. It has to be about working with other levels of government. And so as the Member of Parliament for Vancouver Centre, I would work to encourage BC to implement a truly independent office of the seniors advocate with the ability to investigate complaints and produce public reports similar to the representative for children and youth in BC. That kind of power is sorely needed to protect all seniors, but especially seniors that are in the rainbow community. Thank you.
Thank you, Brianne. Now we go to Dr. Daviani Singh from the Green Party. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. The way I see it, that the core of this problem goes back to that Canada's laws against discrimination are formed on the cis-het normative foundations of patriarchy and white supremacy. There are many policy changes that are needed. Seniors being able to designate their chosen family is a good example of a policy we need. But we also at the same time have to be careful, or there will be no recourse for somebody who's denied that. And so these list of issues is incredibly long, like chosen family, the name you want to go by, dress codes, gender markers in healthcare, stigmatization of the blood ban, as it's been mentioned before as well by other members here. One of the issues I can think of is professionals in the healthcare system think that they don't have to obtain consent for forcing a pregnancy test on someone who has F on their birth certificate, or only having binary gender markers on forms. So there needs to be some sort of compilation of the requests and the changes that people would want to see. And we need to put into place an accountability mechanism for when discrimination is experienced. We've seen that the police don't do anything about this, and nor should it be their role in society. But when there's nowhere to go, when someone forces you to misgender yourself or on a healthcare admission form, for example, we need systems, and we need access to justice systems, which is good. But we need them that are catered to these specific needs and requirements.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Now to Dr. Hedy Fry from the Liberal.
Thank you. Currently, long-term care facilities are actually under provincial jurisdictions. Provinces decide how they run, what the rules are and the regulations are. And so this is one of the reasons that the Liberal Party is has begun to negotiate and getting good results with a lot of provinces. As we saw during COVID, there was a very different set of reactions in different provinces to create a national long-term care act that will actually create a set of standard national policies to look at long-term care. Obviously, if we took a diversity lens and inclusion lens that I talked about, and if we examine the different needs of the different seniors in long-term care, whether they're LGBTQ, and I know many LGBTQ persons who've told me that they're actually scared to be in some long-term care units in Vancouver because people hate them and shun them. You're talking about a very different generation of people that they live with, and so they're scared. But I think the important thing is that we know that who you love is who you love. And who you count to be family is who you're going to count to be family. And if you took a diversity lens and you said to provinces, one of the criteria we're going to have, one of the common values we're going to have is that you have to allow people to decide who their families are, who they love, and how they live in those long-term care units so that their human rights can be actually realized.
Thank you, Dr. Fry. And finally, we go to Hannah Hodgson from the Conservatives.
Thank you so much for the question. Just to be clear, long-term care facilities are provincial jurisdiction, not because they just happen to be now, but because that is what the Constitution says. And so it is provincial jurisdiction. But things like assigning chosen family, I would strongly support that. I would advocate it. And the federal government owns many long-term care homes, and I would advocate it in those long-term care homes as an MP, because, we need to do better on this. And, talking about services that support people, and Brian talking about people he knew, one of the things that I think that is an example of federal government, an example of something that maybe people don't think about, is recently I changed my name, and the actual name change process was very, very simple. It was actually pretty easy. It was expensive, but it was easy. I had to get notarized forms and send dozens of forms to different federal government agencies and departments because they didn't communicate to each other. So things like that and streamlining those things would make a big difference in many LGBTQ people's lives. But in terms of long-term care homes, I strongly would advocate for long-term care homes, provincial governments to put in those protections for people, because those protections are important, but they are provincial jurisdiction.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you to everyone for staying within time limits. In fact, we've run a bit ahead of schedule, so we are actually going to take one question that has come in from the audience, and it's on a topic that many of you have been alluding to all night, and I think it's one that is very important to our community. And this question comes from Harley Augustino, and he says, I am a 43-year-old gay man who has lived in the West End for over 10 years. When I was a teenager, I loved supporting my community by giving blood. For the past 25 years, I have been banned from giving. It is 2021. Why hasn't the blood ban been stopped in the last 6 years? The first opportunity to answer this is going to go to Dr. Singh. Dr. Singh from the Green Party.
Sorry.
Do you want to? Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
We have two doctors.
I know. Sorry, it's been this is like the end of I'm on hour 8 of Zoom calls today, so I'm just getting some Zoom fatigue. Sorry, but I agree. I think the blood ban needs to go. It is, and I don't think it is ethical. It is not. It is discriminatory, and I have not supported that. And but we also need to it's discriminatory to queer people, to trans people, and I've just not understood why it exists. And it is as simple as that. So I think I do not, just like with conversion therapy, the Liberals have been taking their own sweet time. Blood ban is another issue. These are real issues that the queer community faces, and it would be really good to see MPs step up and take these and consider these priorities.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Now over to Dr. Hedy Fry with the Liberal.
Thank you. The people who decide on what the criteria is going to be for donating blood is the Blood Agency of Canada. And it has made a decision that it in spite of the fact that we have lobbied very hard, me personally, because as a physician, I believe that we should not have this ban, especially now that there is a very accurate test for many diseases. We can just generally universal precautions, it's called. Everybody should have to undergo the same tests to check them for hepatitis A, B, C, et cetera, and move on and just be universal. We shouldn't pick it on what a person's lifestyle is or what a person's age is or how they live. That's not scientifically based. And so I'm pushing for that. The federal government, the prime minister, the cabinet has asked Blood Agency to change this, and the Blood Agency seems a little reluctant to do it. And it is an arm's length body that reports to Parliament, and we cannot force it to do those things that it doesn't want to do. But I am going to continue to lobby for us to end the blood ban.
Thank you, Dr. Fry. Let's go to Hannah Hodgson with the Conservatives.
I just like to say the idea that government, the prime minister, majority Liberal government in 2015 can do nothing. Their hands are tied. The blood service can do nothing. Blood service is arm's length, yes, but it is part of government. It is a creation of government. The guiding legislation of that organization, the government can introduce a bill, and I'm sure it would get unanimous consent to change the services to revoke the blood ban. I would like to just mention one aspect of the blood ban that I don't think it's talked about enough. I mean, it obviously affects men who have sex with men. We know that very clearly. It also strongly affects trans women because despite my birth certificate saying female, Canadian Blood Service considers me male. In 2021, a government agency has an explicitly transphobic policy. In fact, their specific policy is one only can change their gender if they get bottom surgery. Seeing a gender transition as being completed when one receives bottom surgery is an antiquated and transphobic view of what gender, sexuality, identity is, and has no place in Canada in 2021. And the idea that the government, just the elected government, majority government, minority government, whatever, there's universal support for this. The idea that they can say, well, our hands are tied, we can't do anything, sorry everyone, is absolutely ridiculous. And I will fight with every measure of strength to remove the blood ban because it is the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Let's final chance to answer this goes to Brianne Ouellette of the Ndp.
Thank you. And thank you for adding that, Hannah. It's absolutely correct. It just boils my blood. I'm sorry to use the pun, but it makes me so angry because in 2019, when I started to look into this, I watched a propaganda video of blood services, and it involved a gay man interviewing a top doctor at blood services. And at one point he asks why they can't just end the blood ban. And the doctor says it's because the majority of Canadians wouldn't accept it. And that is not a reason. That is not based in science. And for Dr. Fry to say that their hands are tied because it's an arm's length institution, I agree with Hannah. The federal government has more than one option. They can pass legislation. They could make it a crime to be discriminatory on that basis. They could also go to court and fight it out in court. And I think the courts would side on the right side. But I think we've seen far too often that the Liberal government has certain things that they're willing to fight for, like the ultra rich and ensuring that billionaires don't get taxed beyond a certain percentage, as we've heard recently from the Prime Minister. And then there are other things that they leave by the road. And this one, the blood ban, is clearly one that they are just ignoring and pretending they have no power to correct. It needs to be gone.
Thank you, Brianne. Thank you, and thank you to all the candidates for a very lively and informative discussion. We've actually reached the end of our program, but we do have time for a round of closing statements before we say goodbye. So each candidate will have 2 minutes to make their closing statement, starting with Dr. Hedy Fry.
I keep unmuting so that you don't hear noises, and then I forget to unmute. Look, we've discussed some very, very important topics. I ran in 1993 based on the issue of equality, equal rights, equal access under the law to all people in the LGBTQ2 community. I will continue to fight for these things. I told you how I felt about the blood ban. It's not scientific. It's not at all based in science. But the thing to remember is that, one, it's easy to say, oh, we will ignore this and go ahead and do what we want. There's a constitution in this country. There are other things that we are bound to respect. And the point here about the Blood Services of Canada is that it is reporting not to government, it reports to Parliament. Parliament is not government. Parliament is made up of all political parties. And if all political parties have decided that they want to tell the Blood Services of Canada to do this, it will be done. But the government is not all powerful and can't run roughshod over the law. And I find that when we talk and we don't really speak about how things really work and what we can do when we are parliamentarians, it confuses everyone and it makes it muddy and it's just rhetoric. I just want to say I'm committed, and I've always been committed to LGBTQ2+ rights, and will continue to go to bat for anything that makes this community equal under the law, and to understand the diversity and the intersectionality of this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fry. Let's go to Hannah Hodgson from the Conservatives for your closing statement. Hannah?
Thank you. I think we've had a good discussion here tonight. I think we've shown a difference of opinions, but also a very respectful dialogue. So I just want to close by speaking directly to LGBTQ people, specifically LGBTQ youth that may be watching tonight, who may be scared. I know many young people who are scared to come out to their parents, are scared to come out to their communities, and are terrified of being kicked out of their homes. I know young trans people who are living in shelters because their families kicked them out. I want you all to know that you are perfect and you are loved, and this country is for you. And all of us here, regardless of our political disagreements, all of us here on this panel have your back. I have your back. And we will all fight for you, because you are the future of this country and you are important. And it is essential that we all do our part to make sure that LGBTQ youth are supported and shouldn't be terrified that their parents or their communities are going to throw them out or turn their backs on them. That's the future that I want, and I think that's the future we're all working towards. And I am proud to fight with all of you here for that future together. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah, for that. Now let's go to Brianne Ouellette of the Ndp for your closing statement. Brianne?
I started my introduction today on a song because I had a feeling that we would have a very hard conversation today, a very heavy conversation. A conversation that could go on for much longer than it has. And I thank everybody here for participating in a good way. I thank everybody who's listened today and is trying to understand the best course of action for our country. And I want to ask everyone that's voting on September 20th that you think about how hard are we going to fight for human rights? Because that's what this is about. Are they really the most important thing in our country? Or are human rights something that we can compromise on because of taxation or because some people aren't ready for change yet? I know that I have a track record of fighting hard no matter what. And I promise you, as the Member of Parliament for Vancouver Centre, I will continue to bring that fight with every ounce of my strength, and I will do it on behalf of the Rainbow community and on behalf of every other marginalized community across this country. Vote for new leadership in Canada on September 20th. Thank you.
Thank you, Brianne. And finally, to Dr. Daviani Singh from the Green Party for our last closing statement.
I want to begin by saying I want to thank community and the organizers for this panel, putting this panel together, and for bringing these queer issues into the discourse of this election, not just during election time, during the rest of the year. These are issues that are very real for us, but these are not something that is often discussed or gets thrown to the side, as we have seen time and time again when it comes to legislation like blood bans or conversion therapy. And these impact people. These are like it impacts their mental health. It impacts their day-to-day lives. It can impact. It has major impacts on this community. As somebody who has felt racism, homophobia, sexism, this is very important. This is one of the reasons I am running. It's because we need these experiences. Somebody who has felt this in Parliament, so that when these decisions come up for voting in future, there is somebody who truly understands. We need more people like us to be elected, to be the voice of experience, of lived experiences in these situations. And when you take being queer in society and you put poverty, disability, or being racialized, it compounds this discrimination that is faced by people. And this is very real and very true. And I say that with every policy that is there, it needs to have a justice lens. We have to look, justice has to be centered, equity has to be centered in every policy going forward. Because the only way in the future that I see is when we have a truly equitable society. And this is why I thank all the other panelists for being here and for saying how you feel. And I'm truly humbled and honored to be here amongst all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. And yes, thank you to all of the candidates, the panelists who have joined us for tonight. Putting your name forward, participating in this process is such an important thing. It's a difficult thing, especially in this climate and the way the things go. And I think we all can acknowledge that it's only gotten more intense and difficult in recent years for people to put their names forward, especially people who represent our diverse community like all of you. So thank you so much for doing that and taking the time for such a respectful conversation this evening. Also want to thank Community, Rainbow Refugee, Community-Based Research Center, Pride at Work Canada, Loud Business Association for hosting tonight's discussion. Also want to thank Sempelyan for his wonderful welcome, and a very special thank you to Lise and Sharon, our ASL interpreters, for helping make tonight's event more accessible. Once again, it's been such a pleasure to be a part of Proud2Vote yet again. And this is the time of the night where I give the shameless plug to my hardworking team of journalists covering this important election. Please visit citynews1130.com, listen to us on News 1130, watch us on City News at 6 and 11 as we work to keep you informed. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. And most importantly, we are here because your choice and participating in that process is an important one. Voting day is Monday, September 20th. Please make sure you go and cast your ballot. Have a good night, everyone.